Hello, and welcome to the first Incite program of 2021. I don't know about you, but it feels like a triumph to be here tonight. Incite, Captivating Explorations of Books and Ideas, is a series presented in partnership between the Vancouver Writers Fest and the Vancouver Public Library. I am Amber Ritchie with the Vancouver Public Library, and I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging that my home and the VPL are located on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Before I turn you over to the main event, I want to tell you about another Vancouver Public Library program that is coming up next week, Thursday, January 28th at 7 p.m. on our Zoom platform. It's called Closer During COVID, a night of stories and connection. For a lot of us, this has been a time of isolation and social loneliness, but there are some people who have managed to become closer during this time. Next Thursday, we'll have 4 Vancouverites, Vanessa Richards, Michelle Sisa, Charles Montgomery, and Emily Gilpin, share their stories of how they've come closer together with friends, family, or themselves during this time. More information about this event can be found on the Vancouver Public Library website, vpl.ca, or through our email newsletter. I would now like to turn this over to Leslie Hertig, Artistic Director of the Vancouver Writers Festival. Please give Leslie a warm welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Amber, and good evening. Welcome to the Incite 2021 season. We are so glad that you could all join us here this evening. I mean, yeah, there's some stuff happening south of the border, it's true, but it is now time to celebrate some Canadian content. And we are thrilled to welcome author and festival friend Jael Richardson with her debut novel, Ghetto. I had the great pleasure of reading this title over the holiday and was mesmerized by the imagined world of its protagonist, Elamina. She inhabits the story that unfolded there in a way that has just stayed with me, and I know it will for a very long time. Ghetto goes on sale this week. You can find it in your favorite bookstore. I highly recommend you get out and pick up a copy of this title. We would like to thank our Incite partner this evening, the Vancouver Public Library, for their continued support. Thank you also to our government sponsors, the Government of Canada, the Government of BC, the BC Arts Council, the City of Vancouver, and CMHC Granville Island. We are kicking off this new season tonight, and I'm pleased to say that we'll be hosting events every other Wednesday between now and June, as well as some special events and our digital book club. You may have noticed in the opening slides there, we announced a big event today. We will be welcoming Ethan Hawke with his new novel on March the 14th, and you can find more information on this chat that will happen on our website. Check out our website and learn more about that. Also, just mark your calendars now for the 3rd week of October, because we are hoping we'll be hosting an in-person festival. Will we be? Will we be hosting an in-person festival? I really hope so, but stay tuned, we'll find out. After tonight's event, you will receive a survey. Many of you know about this already. We really rely on your feedback to make our events better. So please take some time to fill that out. It'll arrive in your inbox at some point. One lucky survey participant will win a copy of a forthcoming Incite title. The format for tonight is pretty straightforward. Soon I'm going to turn things over to our exceptional moderator, Marsha Lederman. We encourage you all to please submit some questions using the chat function here on your Zoom, on your YouTube screen there. And we will be sure to forward those through to Marsha to ask Jael. And now, please allow me to introduce Marsha Lederman, who in turn will introduce Jael. Marsha Lederman is the Western Arts Correspondent for the Globe and Mail. She writes on everything from film and theater to visual arts and literary arts. She's a great friend of the festival, and we're very happy to have her here to help us kick off this new season of Incite. Please welcome Marsha Lederman.
Thank you, Leslie. My cat literally just walked across the keyboard moments ago. So who knows what fun is in store tonight regarding the feline friend of the festival. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. It's really an auspicious day, and it's actually a great day to be talking about this book. And I'm really, really excited to talk to Jael Richardson about Gutter Child. I won't go on too long, but I will say that Jael is a very well-known and established figure in Canadian literature. She's the founder and executive director of The Fold, the Festival of Literary Diversity. She's a books columnist for CBC Radio's Q and for Canada Reads. Her first book was a memoir called The Stone Thrower, A Daughter's Lessons, A Father's Life, about her relationship with her dad. It won several awards, and it was also published as a children's book. Anyone who has spent any time talking or listening to Jael knows how smart, passionate, and committed she is. She's such an important voice in literature in this country, and also as an advocate for diversity in all areas. And I'm so thrilled to have you join us from Brampton. Can you hear my cat meowing?
I can, but only I only heard like a little bit, but I think it's like warming. It means we're, people are alive, animals are moving, life is good.
Okay, I have to ask you, were you planning to wear that color of sweater before the inauguration happened today?
No, I actually decided to wear this. I was weighing a few options as I normally do, and I decided to wear this one. And I'm really glad you asked, because I was watching a special and they were talking about Alpha Kappa Alphas, which is the sorority that Kamala Harris was a part of. And my grandmother pledged Alpha Kappa Alpha. And so they wear pink and they wear pearls. And so it's an African-American sorority sisters. And so I'm wearing it in honor of her and in honor of just our new VP.
That's amazing.
I also say our, my family's American. So that when I say our, yeah.
We'll take her, especially after the last.
We'll just take her.
The last bunch. I also chose this color, and I'm wearing some pearls as well. So there you go, in honor of today. And before we get to the book, can I ask you what it was like to watch that today? I'm assuming you watched some of it.
I've been watching since 8 o'clock this morning. And I made my son take time off school to watch some of it. It was really lovely, really lovely. Just an enjoyable day. I felt like literally when they pledged, when they did their little, I swear to be da-da-da, and then it was official, I was like, just took a deep breath. It felt like just a fresh air situation.
Agreed. It's like, okay, we made it.
Yeah, we can speak full sentences and tell truths, and all these things can happen now. Not call people names. This is grown-up stuff here. I love it.
And the poet laureate, Amanda Gorman. Oh my gosh,
so good.
Incredible, right?
Yeah.
And she actually brought up quite a few themes that reminded me of your book. So we'll get into that in a moment. And I guess a great way for us to start would be with a short reading, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
So here is Jael reading from Gutter Child.
Thanks. Okay, I'm just going to read the first few lines from the opening, or first little bit from the opening chapter. The driver looks in my direction, full of worry. Her lips are red, glossy, and pouted, and there's a crease in her forehead, like she's the one with problems, not me. I stare out the window, wishing I could go back and put my old life back together, which is impossible, I know. So here I am instead, hours away from the only home I've ever known, and driving up a long gravel road through a tunnel of trees with branches that reach down like fingers, hungry for touch. This is Livingstone Academy, Miss Femia says, as we pull up to a grand white house with black shutters and a door that's green like a swamp. The car slows to a stop under a droopy willow, and I step out in what feels like a whole different world. I take one deep breath and close my eyes, and when I open them again, Miss Femia is standing in front of me with her tight bun and waxy mouth. She takes my hand in hers, rubbing my scar with her thumb, the hideous X on the back of my right hand that's ugly and raw. She sighs, and I wonder if it's sadness in her eyes, because it's hard to tell with mainlanders. Pity looks very much the same. I know this wasn't the plan, she says, but let's make the most of it, hey? Her voice is high and hopeful, and I hate the way it sounds, like forgetting the life I had is my best option, like that's even possible. I really think you might like it here. I think your mother would have really liked this place, she says. I want to tell her that what mother would probably like is to be living instead of dead, to be back home with me instead of wherever it is she is now. But Miss Femia doesn't have children, and people without children always share silly bits of wisdom like it will all go to waste if they don't. Yes, let's make the most of it, I say, turning up the corners of my mouth as high as I can manage, which isn't much. You can do this, Elamina, she says, wrapping her fingers around the doorknob, holding the swamp-colored door with her back. You can find happiness here. But happiness isn't something a kid like me can afford to hold out for. The main entrance of Livingstone Academy is large and impressive, with tall columns and a wide carpeted stairwell that curves like a bow. Framed pictures of open landscapes and wide fields hang on brightly lit walls. At least it's not the gutter, I try to tell myself, as I turn and take it all in. Miss Femia, a man says, emerging from a hallway in a sharp tan suit, followed by a girl in a gray dress with a crisp white shirt underneath. The tall man with slick brown hair takes large steps across the room to greet us, kissing Miss Femia on the cheek and smiling down at me after. I stare back at him with wide eyes because, other than mother, no mainlander has ever looked at me this way, like they're actually pleased that I've arrived. Elamina, it's a tremendous honor to have you here at Livingstone Academy. I'm Headmaster Samuel J. Gregors, but Mr. Gregors will do just fine. He smiles and pauses for a moment, raising his chin in a way that makes me wonder if I'm expected to curtsy or applaud. While the circumstances that brought you here are less than ideal, I believe that Livingstone is exactly where you need to be, he says. Elamina, I sincerely believe that here in our tidy little academy, you'll find a home that propels you into an excellent future. He looks down at the girl in the gray dress whose hair is pulled into two round ponytails. Her skin is like mine, the color of oak trees and coconuts, as mother would say, whenever she rubbed lotion onto my skin that smelled like a spring rain. This is Josephine. She's one of our best students, he says, nodding in Josephine's direction as she takes a step forward, so we're close enough to touch. Josephine tilts her head, taking in my shaved head and raising one eyebrow. Mother started shaving my head when I was 5 years old because I had curls that refused to submit to her, hair that grew out instead of down. It's impossible to deal with. There's just nothing else I can do, she said, lifting me onto a tall stool where a pair of scissors lay resting on the countertop. She cut one messy ponytail, and when I gasped, she cut the other one quickly before grabbing a razor to take the rest. When she was done, when tiny black curls were scattered around her like feathers, she held my face between her hands, tilting me this way and that, marveling at the richness of my skin held in her moon-colored palms. She smiled like she was proud of the result, the smoothness, the even shape, how clean I looked. Perfect, she said. You look perfect, Elamina, a beautiful ebony goddess. Her eyes were wet, but no tears fell, and I believed every word she said. You are perfect, beautiful, a goddess. But when I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I didn't recognize. I saw a head that was naked and shorn like a bird born too soon, one that would never grow up and fly. And I knew that she had lied. You made me ugly, I yelled. And when I said those words again, shrill and loud, she called me vain and selfish. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you for that. There are so many themes that are pertinent to the book that come up in that short reading. The politics of hair, motherhood, inequality, lies, and truth. The book pulls no punches when it comes to issues of race and social inequality. And it's amazing how you've created this world. And I wanted to ask you, maybe it's a chicken and egg question, but what came first, the story or the wanting to tell a story that would point a spotlight on these issues?
I think maybe neither in a way. I think more a question. When I finished The Stone Thrower and writing the story about my dad's life, I became quite obsessed with this question about how do you navigate a world that's designed for your failure? Because I came to see America, where my family was from, and Canada as places where a constitution had been built for the success of some in terms of white Americans and settlers, and the failure of others. And specifically, I was thinking about the African American and African Canadian communities and the Black communities across the border and even around the world. And so I was just like obsessed with this idea of like, what happens when the world is designed for your failure? When do you realize it? And what kind of choices do you make when you realize it or when you don't realize it? And so I thought, I needed to create a world where the rules were designed for the failure of some and figure out what my characters would do to navigate their way out of it. So for me, a lot of it was like a test, trying to figure out, you know, if I have this world and I make this character, what is she going to do when she gets there?
Can I ask about the timing? When were you starting to think about this and create this world in your head?
I started writing Gutter Child the minute I submitted my final manuscript for Stone Thrower. And it was funny because when I wrote Stone Thrower, I didn't necessarily think I was going to be a writer per se. I knew I was going to write this book about my dad's life, but I had no idea that it was going to be like my career. I really didn't. And when I finished it and the idea for Gutter Child came right away, that was the moment I thought, oh, I'm going to keep doing this thing. I'm going to keep writing stories. They're going to keep coming to me and I'll just have to answer to them. And it was interesting too, because I had always thought about books as like ideas that writers have, and they just come up with an idea and they write about it. I had never thought that you really couldn't choose the story that comes to you. And that's how it feels for me with writing. I don't feel like I have a lot of choice. The book that comes to me is the book I have to write because I can't really rest or move on to the next thing until it's done.
How different was it writing a novel versus a memoir?
Very different. And I don't know if I'll ever go back to writing nonfiction, to be honest. I think when I was writing nonfiction, there's so much attention to detail and accuracy and so much worry for me about getting it right. There was actually a mistake in the Stone Thrower that I wasn't able to correct. It's just like an inaccuracy about the Olympics in 1968. And I felt so terrible because I found out before it went to officially got published, like came into stores, but it was too late to correct it. And I felt awful. I had done all this research and I had actually gotten it from a reliable source that was also wrong. So I feel like writing a dystopia is the exact opposite of writing nonfiction because you literally don't have to depend on any realities. You can make your world super big, super small. You can make it like something people have seen before or totally different. And so I felt like for me, dystopia has a real comfort zone because I feel a lot of freedom when I write, and I feel a lot of creativity that is a bit more restricted when I write nonfiction. And even when you write fiction that's kind of based like in an actual place,
Dystopia and comfort zone. I don't always put those together in the same sentence, but I'm glad it's working for you. All right, let's talk about this dystopia and we won't spoil anything, but I want to talk about the world. So can you just maybe tell us a little bit about the mainland, the gutter, the hill?
Yeah. And I think I hate spoilers. So there won't be anything that isn't in the first 50 pages. That's sort of like my general rule. And if it dips a little later, it's not like super surprising. So I think one of the things that I was really interested in exploring in creating the gutter and the mainland and the hill was about the Black experience. That was sort of at the heart of it. And so I was trying to think about what I wanted to explore in the Black experience in particular. And so the mainland is so there's two major settings in the book, the mainland and the gutter. And the mainland is sort of a reminder of colonization. It's been established by people who came. It wasn't their land to begin with, but they've created this economy and set up this whole system that really works for them. And then there's the gutter, and the gutter is on the southernmost tip of the mainland, sort of hangs off the edge, and it's where the descendants of the people who tried to prevent the mainland from happening are living. And so there's a whole system that's designed to both penalize people in the gutter, but also provide an opportunity for them to redeem themselves. And there's this whole economic system that keeps this all in place. And so I was very much interested in what it would look like to build this kind of world that was very obviously established to make life intentionally more difficult for some from the time they were born. That was really the underlying foundation for the gutter. And then to have Elamina come into this world as someone who didn't really know what was going on. She's part of a social experiment where she was actually raised on the mainland. So she's never really lived in the gutter. And so really what I'm hoping people do as they read the book is trying to figure out, like Elamina, what really is the mainland in the gutter, what's true, what's taught, what's not taught, what's told, what's untold, and what is Elamina and the other gutter children that are at Livingstone Academy, which is the first setting in the novel. What are they going to do about it? How are they going to react and respond to all the things that happen to them and that they see?
And Elamina is Black, and the woman who raised her was white. She's dead.
So yeah, and I never used the terms black and white in the book,
right.
which was a thing. I was kind of like weighing back and forth. But Elamina is a gutter child, and her mother who raised her is a mainlander. And so that's how she sort of spent her life on the mainland, experiencing what mainlanders experience. And when her mother dies, as you heard at the very beginning of the novel, she's put back into the gutter system with other gutter children. And she has to kind of figure out, like, what does this mean for her? How does this change the plans that she had? And, what was she told and not told is going to be a really important part of the story as well.
I'm picturing many university or even high school essays about this book, drawing the parallels with real world situations. So the beautiful city she grows up in is Cape Town. And of course, I'm thinking of Cape Town and apartheid. And, the academy's system obviously seems like a nod to the residential school system. How much of that was mapped out by you sort of consciously?
Yeah, so I was thinking, apartheid was a really important part for me. I was very much trying to think about, I've spent a lot of my life learning about America and American history, and I've never thought so much about my ancestors further along. And so I was trying to actually think about experiences related to African countries. I was really rooted in that. Apartheid in South Africa for sure was a big part of it. I did a lot of reading about that and thinking about that. And so it wasn't so much about our residential school system, although there are echoes of it, because colonization sort of has a system of its own where no matter where you go, no matter what country you're in, there's same sort of steps happen. The education system is heavily influenced when in colonized countries. And to that end, I think there's also, for me, I think it's really important not just to look super deep into history and say, oh, it's like things that happened way back then. There's also nods to things that are happening right now and inequities that exist in our education system now. And particularly one of the things that's really important to me is to thinking about the way we stream kids in school and the kinds of messages we give kids about education that kind of funnel them in one direction and also create a hierarchy in that direction at the same time, and then also tend to racialize that hierarchy. And so I was really thinking about what kids are living right now. I've had a couple of foster teens come through my home, and just the experiences that they have in school, that was front of mind as well. And so all of those things were playing. I was playing with history and the present at the same time, I feel like, and that was fundamental to the creation of the mainland, the gutter, and the hill, which we haven't talked a lot about because it's hard to talk about without spoiling a little bit.
Okay.
But there's also the hill. And I think what I'll say about the hill is I think it was important for me to think about different kinds of Black experiences when I was looking at people in the gutter and their heritage and their lineage. I was trying to think about the different ways Black people across the diaspora, across the world, sort of respond to colonization and the different ways to exist after colonization. Because I think there are, you can come out of it middle class, upper class, lower class, but with all of those things come some sacrifices, some compromises, and division and conflict. And that's, another layer of colonization that's quite devastating, is the way that people are separated from each other in terms of community and divided from one another.
And the economic piece of this is really important. That sort of carrot that's almost unachievable in a system, as you pointed out, that sets you up for failure from the very beginning. And that is not so different from what's happening in the world now.
Yeah. Did you want to? Yeah. Go ahead.
I guess my question is, because there was no question there,
is
to what extent you're trying to make a point, it's clear, but this is a very rich story that is not hitting anyone over the head with anything. So I guess I'm wondering how you balance that out.
Yeah. So one of the things that happens in the book early on, you hear about the X on Elamina's hand, and then there's the X on two X's on the other gutter children's hand. And you learn that that's part of being from the gutter means being connected to a debt that is passed on through your family. So that every gutter child is born with a debt they spend their entire lives trying to pay off. And there's different ways to pay that off. There's different ways to sort of try and maneuver through the system. And for sure, I was thinking about the idea that when it comes back to the story my dad actually told when we were watching the Trayvon Martin case, and when George Zimmerman got off. So Trayvon Martin was the young man who was killed, and Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman, who then got off. And my dad watches all this news and is very rooted in American politics and American news. And he just I was sort of disappointed. I was very disappointed and upset. And my dad said, well, of course this happens. The rules were built to, support George Zimmerman's of the world in these kinds of situations. And they weren't built with Trayvon in mind. And I just kept thinking about the different ways that especially low income folks, because I think it's across race when you're, low income, but also Black folks in particular who are also low income, sort of start out in a more difficult position and spend their lives trying to get out of it when all these rules are literally stacked against them. And I don't know if some of you heard this, but I remember during the campaign, during the Biden Trump campaign, the NBA basketball players were actually helping prisoners who had been freed from prison, they had gotten out, pay off their debts because they weren't allowed to vote until their debts were paid off. And I didn't even know that when I was writing Gutter Child, but it was one of those things I was like, oh, you write things and create things and then you see them played out. And I kept seeing stories kind of like that. Someone who had this major debt who couldn't get into university, or their school debt was so high that they couldn't do X. And so I think financial debt, school debt, credit card debt is a particular kind of pain, agony, pressure on the back. And I felt like that was one of the most clear ways to walk through the question I had about what do you do when you figure that out? It's one thing to be young and sort of think like, oh, I'm fine. There's hard things in my life, but like whatever. But when Elamina realizes she has this debt, I think that's a big moment for her. And you see how that affects the decisions that she's given and the choices she can make as she goes through her life.
And I think that there have been many instances, especially over the past 4 years, where we have felt a little bit high and mighty being Canadian and not American. Yeah. But this is an issue in Canada as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's an issue. We do not care for the most disadvantaged, generally speaking. We generally leave our most disadvantaged citizens to figure out how to navigate the world after putting so much extra pressure on them and on their lives. I think one of the things that I've always been grateful for in Canada is healthcare and free healthcare. And I will brag till the cows come home about that, because there's a particular kind of debt that comes from just trying to stay healthy in the US, or coming across unexpected illnesses that can turn a wealthy family into a poor family in seconds, and can turn a poor family into a never going to get out of this situation family. And so I think it was a really helpful way for me to unpack the kinds of difficult choices you make when that kind of burden lies on your back.
It's gutting. I was thinking as you were saying that, and then I thought gutting, gutter, and then I wondered about the term gutter child. How did you come up with that?
Gutter child, the term gutter, it came to me really early. I think I knew the title of the book, pretty soon after I submitted Stone Thrower. And I really wanted a word. I didn't want to use Black, and I didn't ever in the book. I wanted to kind of avoid that terminology, but I wanted something that had a similar effect in a way. I think we've all gotten used to the term Black, and we all use it, and we've all kind of accepted it. But the reality is, when I was growing up, the term Black always felt very negative to me. It felt negative to use on myself. It felt negative in general. I grew up, I'm a person of faith. I grew up going to church all the time, and you'd hear like, wash me whiter than snow. Sin was black. It was evil. It was bad. Like everything related to Blackness was a bad word. And even Blackness represented on TV was bad. And so I wanted a word that was very obviously bad for the book, because I wanted people to think about the way language is used to oppress people and to put people down. Gutter isn't the name of the people who are the original inhabitants of the land. It was the name that was imposed on them. And that's what's happened in history as well with colonization. We are named by people who name themselves better words, right? They call themselves white, they call us Black. And you see how, I mean, it's funny when you watch even like elections and inauguration addresses like today, there's such poetic, beautiful language that's chosen. And so, when they picked white and when they picked Black, they did it with a very particular intention. And so gutter child, for me, the word gutter was a really important way to draw attention to the way language is placed on people, and then becomes part of their presentation to the world, right? If you hear gutter child, nothing about that makes you feel good. You're not thinking that that's going to be a pleasant person or a good person. And to be honest, being called Black actually has the same effect for me in a lot of ways. I think we've reappropriated it, and I'm proud, but it's still, when you look at other ways that Black is used, it's still attached to very negative things, generally speaking. And I wanted people to think about that.
Yeah, it's a Black moment. It's a dark moment. Yeah. Gutter also sounds a lot like ghetto. And when I was growing up in Toronto, there were areas that would be referred to as the ghetto in a very disparaging way. And it was areas of impoverishment and where people of color lived. Was that intentional? Gutter, ghetto?
One of the things I was obsessed with, I mean, I didn't necessarily think of the connection between gutter and ghetto per se, but I was quite obsessed with the concept of the ghetto, because in my dad's story, what I discovered in the US is that everywhere in the US, the racism and the oppression is geographical. It's like in every city you have the nice area, the good area, the suburbs or whatever, and you cross over a railroad track, a river, a bridge, and it's the Black community. It's where people were allowed to settle after slavery or after during segregation. And so the gutter for me was this very segregated, set apart community that had these particular rules to it. And so I'd like to say I was clever enough to like combine gutter and ghetto, but the concept of the ghetto is very much what I wanted to frame the gutter. Like that's where my original ideas when I was creating the gutter sort of sat.
And even there's, again, I won't give anything away, but there's a point where we get to the gutter and the way it's sealed off from everything else reminded me of the ghettos during the Second World War. So again, there's that whole ghetto gutter, which I'm sure somewhere in your subconscious, you made that connection.
Well, I was working on Gutter Child for 8 years, and so many of the decisions that were made in those early years, I actually don't remember, to be honest. It's been so long. It feels like there was almost because I started Fold after I had started the book, and then I had took a bit of a break from writing it right around the time I was working on the first festival, and then I got back into it. And so it feels a little bit to me like there was work I did pre-Fold and post-Fold, and a lot of the pre-Fold stuff I don't remember. It was already, in the manuscript, and I was just like, yeah, that's a good one, I'm going to keep it. But I don't always remember the origins. So I'm just going to claim that. I knew that. Gutter, ghetto, yes.
Take it. It's yours. I was curious, well, you just said you worked on it for 8 years, but I was curious how much you wrote during the Trump presidency and how that infiltrated its way into the book.
Look, I'm not going to lie. The Trump presidency was hard, just in general on me emotionally. I can't even, multiple layers of hard. What I will say is that the Trump presidency did give me some of what I think are like the good gems that came in late in the process. I actually didn't write or decide firmly on the ending until, March, April of this year. Or I guess this past year. And I was really struggling. I actually had an epilogue at one point, cut it at the last minute. My editor had a heart attack. It was fine. But a lot of the things, a lot of the things that were sort of added layers to the story from what I saw happening during the Trump presidency, because I think it gave me an even clearer picture of how the system sort of protects itself and has been built to sort of raise up the wealthy to stay wealthy, raise up the powerful to stay powerful, and to create a deeper separation between the wealthy and the powerful and the poor. And so it just gave me clearer and more dramatic spreads in the dystopian world. I think it made me more comfortable in some ways with some of the decisions I was making, because I was like, this is bizarre. So what I'm writing is not actually as bizarre as I thought.
Yes, some of the stuff that actually happened, one could never make up for fear of being too out there.
And I will say, like, one of the characters early on in the book, I started to see a lot of Black folks who were supporting Trump and who were really like going to bat for him. And one of the characters from Livingstone Academy, I think, became a little bit more full. Watching, I was able to like, oh, okay, there's people who can totally put who they are behind them and do this other thing. So that was, I think a part of it.
Well, I'm glad it was good for something.
I know, right?
And I'm so glad we're using the past tense.
Yes. Was.
I should say that we are going to open it up to questions in a few minutes. So if anyone who's watching has a question for Jael, there is a way to submit it. I can't explain it, but I think it's quite evident as you are watching. There's a place to ask a question, and it will be funneled to me, and I will ask it. So please do. I wanted to talk to you about motherhood, because that is a very important element in the story as well. And you mentioned that you had a couple of foster children. They were teenagers, I think.
Yep.
And you mentioned them in the acknowledgements as well. And I was curious about how your life as a mother and a foster mother and mother of a festival, actually, because it is a bit like...
I did have that child too.
You raised Fold from birth. How much you drew from that for the book?
I think a lot of what I wrote was influenced by my experiences and also by my dad's experiences. I think one of the things that really I wanted to come across is what I think one of the greatest travesties of colonization and slavery was the way families are kind of decimated and broken apart. And in the Black community in particular, the way fathers, mothers, children were separated generation after generation is just one of the most heartbreaking generational losses that one of the cruelest things about slavery, to be honest. And it happens also in other places, in other situations. But what's amazing in response to that is the incredible way community is formed in Black families, in the Black community. You know, you take other kids in without question. Someone's lost a parent, someone's lost, so, you know, I saw it in my dad's community. I saw it in the story I researched in his life. And I saw it in my in-laws as well. They are like, well, I have 13 siblings, but I actually have 18 because we brought in, you know, and there's just this natural sense that like family is not just blood. And so I think that was a big part of the story and influenced the motherhood aspects, because I think Elamina has a biological mother, obviously. She also has an adopted mother, and she also those two mothers are both she has neither of them at the start of the novel. And so it was also about the other people who come into her life as mothers, as people who care for her. And then, you know, how she sort of sees her role. And I think all of those things were rooted in my experiences, but also what I came to understand about my ancestors and my legacy and the families that formed me. It's just this sense that motherhood isn't just the children that are born from you, it's also the children that come into your life in various ways. And you see that with Elamina, with Josephine. I wanted that sense of what we do with kids in need and how we care and how deep the bond of motherhood can be, whether the child comes from you or comes into your home by some other way.
Okay, I'm going to ask this question with a bit of trepidation. The power of the media plays a role in the book. And I won't say how, because again, that's a spoiler. But I wonder if what it's been like for you to watch how the media covers issues that are important to you.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I won't spoil anything either, I'll just walk you through a little bit of my decision-making process when it comes to the book. I think when you create a dystopia, you kind of have three choices as you approach the end. You can be optimistic, you can be pessimistic, or you can be realistic. And what I will say is I spent a lot of time grappling with those three options because I think there were ways to do all three. I could have gone three different ways. And what I tried to do was, I think I picked realistic. That's what I ultimately decided to do. And as a result, I had to think about all the things that are both good and bad about the stories we cover in the Black community, about what gets covered and how it gets covered, about what dominates news cycles and what doesn't dominate news cycles, about who gets the most attention and who doesn't. And there are really tricky things in there. And so, so I was thinking about faith, and I was thinking about the media. Those were both really important parts of, you know, how the story approaches the ending, and things that I will say this, I wrestled with those for 8 years. I wrestled with that kind of, especially just the overall, you know, what's the message of the book? And there's a little message at the front of the book that sort of says like, take care as you're reading this, because I felt like, you know, at this particular time, I should be giving people a book that makes them laugh and like is fun, like, you know, does all the things that, you know, romance, like all that stuff. And it wasn't the book I was given to write. So I had to write this one. And I just sort of put that message in the front to say, like, if you can't do this right now, you know, take a pause and read it later, or take a pause in the middle and pick it up when you can. I don't think it's like, you know, people talk about books that are like devastating and they give these like very dramatic words for it. I think it's just life, you know? And so I hope for the most part, people can push their way through it and see what's in there. But I wrestled for a long time.
I will say very quickly, because I want to get to the audience questions. One, I was surprised by the ending, and I loved the ending. And two, that author's note was, I kept going back to it, actually. It was really beautiful. I actually wrote it down. Take care with your heart and your mind as you read. Pause and rest as required. These are difficult times. Was it the pandemic when you wrote that?
It was the pandemic. It was Black Lives Matter when I was running it. It was the of the two. And Suvankam Thamavangsa, who won the Giller, said, you know, you don't choose the moment your book arrives. Like, you don't choose the world your book arrives into. And I kept thinking, like, I wanted a note at the front because of this particular time, I think is going to be marked in history, 2020, as a particular moment. And that's when I was wrapping the book up. And so I wanted it because I felt like it was true. And now that I look back at it, I'm glad it's there, because even when we move away and further away from 2020, I want people to remember that it was written during that time.
That's wonderful. Okay, let's get to some questions. This is a question from Christina. What is the story behind the cover art of this novel?
So I'm obsessed with covers. I was I get very involved as they'll let me. I will say there were two things that were fundamental to the cover. One, I absolutely did not want a face or a body on the cover. That was like a definite no. And the X is a really important symbol for me in the book, and just a really important marker. I think, you know, there's all kinds of ways in history that X has been present. You know, you think of Malcolm X and those kinds of things, but the X and the scar on their hands is a really important piece of the story. So I wanted that there. Everything else was kind of like a designer's input. In terms of the green, there was a green one and a red one, and we picked the green one. Yeah, those were, I mean, the only thing was no bodies and an X. That's the only thing I put on the cover.
I love that it's green, because when I first looked at it, I saw it as paths going different ways and meeting in the middle. And then I realized, oh, it's an X. But
I love that. I love that. I'm going to claim all these things. Yeah. And then there's kind of like, it looks like a gate. And so yeah, there's lots of good things. I mean, you'll see there's lots of gates.
There are gates, indeed.
Gates.
Okay, next, not Bill. Question number 2 from Anne. Can you tell us a bit more about your decision to not label your characters as Black or white in the story? How did this ambiguity allow you to tell this story in the way you wanted?
Yes. So a couple of things came into mind when I was thinking about calling them Black and white. First of all, I wasn't entirely sure. Well, first of all, I don't really like the word Black. Like, I'm not, you know, in love with that terminology in some ways. And I thought, I don't know, I think I wanted to be free of all the kinds of things we know in those words and that we experience in those words. I really wanted to talk about them as gutter people and mainlanders, and really just explore that without all the loaded things that come with Black and white. And one of the reasons for that is my mother-in-law is from the West Indies. She's from St. Vincent. And she said, I didn't realize I was Black until I came to Canada. And it's because in St. Vincent, I mean, everybody is Black. There's not this differentiation. And so I think that was a big factor in it as well. I realized that Black and white was a very North American experience with race, and a very Western, in particular, experience in the US and Canada. And that in places where you're the majority, you're not actually referring to yourselves in that same way. When my brother went to Africa, he went to, I want to say, I don't think it was Nigeria. I can't remember what country he went to, but he went to a country there, and he, same complexion as me. They actually didn't consider him Black. Like, you're not Black because he's so light. And so that was another reason I felt like those words meant certain things in certain places and in certain histories and certain communities. And I wanted to be free of that. There was a moment where I actually questioned whether all the gutter children were Black or whether they were just people of color. That was a big question I had. And I thought, you know, if they make a movie, will they make it all about, you know, would all the gutter folks be Black, or would they be just different races? And at the end, that decision I nailed down because I just decided I am particularly interested in the Black experience, in the experience of people from the African diaspora. And I didn't feel like I needed to address anyone else's issues, or I really wanted, there was enough issues that I was exploring within the African diaspora that I didn't need to incorporate, India or Native Americans or Indigenous folks. Like, it was just about, for me, unpacking that diaspora, that community.
Is there going to be a movie? Because this should be a movie. It's
Well,
so
I mean, it's everybody's
cinematic.
dream, but like, whatever. I have no control over these things, Marsha. I just go write things and then afterwards imagine all the things that could happen, which usually don't.
Who would play Elamina? Have you thought about it?
I don't know. I mean, it's tricky because, I mean, I picture, I don't know. Actually, I think that one. I was thinking about the girl from Blackish who's really like spicy, but I feel like she'd make a better Josephine, to be honest. Elamina's a particular warm and soft, and she's got a whole bunch of things going on, whereas Josephine's quite solidly spicy.
Yes, she is.
Yeah.
There's a question that is very similar to the previous one, but I'm just going to ask it in case there's something else you want to say about this. You spoke a bit about naming and labels, and I was wondering if you could speak more about the power and importance of naming oneself and one's community.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, I think there's so much power in naming, and that's why colonized folks name everything and they label everything, and they when colonizers do that. And so there is an important part of like reclaiming that, and part of tearing down a system is about tearing down those structures that have been named and been created falsely or with damage, and reclaiming them by reclaiming whatever title you want, whatever name you want to use. And that becomes a theme throughout the book as well, with Elamina's name, with her understanding of the gutter and the people who were the original inhabitants. And there's sort of a resistance. The original inhabitants are called Sosi people. And so there's sort of a limitation on how you can refer to Sosi or where you can put the word Sosi. And so that becomes an important part of the gutter and the people who are particularly oppressed trying to reclaim and rename themselves. And that to me was a very, I feel like we see that in the evolution of time, even calling ourselves Black now. It was previously other words, Negro, colored, all these sorts of things have evolved over time because we've sort of said, okay, not that anymore, and not that anymore. And I think that was probably another reason why I didn't label them Black, because I wonder if, like, is this the name we're going to sit with for all eternity, or will it evolve as well? And so, yeah, the naming, I mean, Gutter Child is just, it's not a great name, and that's the reason I chose it. And so you see over the course of the novel, people wrestling with that and other ways of naming. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, that was a great answer. This is a great question. Do you think dystopia in some ways is a better literary device to comment on race issues than fiction set in the present?
I think better is a hard word. I think every writer has to write what comes to them in the form it comes to them. And for me, I would answer that question, yes. For me, it's better because I think the Black experience in Chicago is one thing. The Black experience in Miami is another thing. When you root it in a particular city, a particular place, a particular country, even a particular year or time frame, you're bound with some laws or some expectations. And so dystopia for me allows me to remove all the things I don't want to deal with. I don't want to deal with like the specifics of Chicago in 1972. But I can take all the things that were actually happening, maybe around 1972, probably in Chicago, and just make them slightly different. So for me, it gives me the best tool to address the issues I'm most interested in tackling, because I can take out the parts I want and leave in the parts I do, and kind of play around with what's left. But I think there are ways to do that with real settings too, and really powerful books that address race. I think readers of different races sometimes prefer one way to another. And that's something some people think about. I don't. So sometimes when you're thinking about a particular audience, like if you're thinking about a Black reader versus a white reader, or a Black reader from US versus a Black reader in Canada, all those things can start to shape the kind of decisions you make. But for me, dystopia just allows me and my words and my writing to just like play around in the playground. I think of it like the Lego movie, you know, when they give you the instructions and the Lego and you can build it exactly the way the instructions tell you, or you can be a master builder and you can just build whatever the heck you want. That's what I'd like to think I did. I'm a master builder.
Did you actually map it out? I wondered about that.
That would have been a more effective way to write, Marsha, to actually map it out and have a plan. I did not. I just started writing. And then that was part of like the pre-fold writing, was like, whatever I want in whatever way I want. And then post-fold was like, oh, there are rules that you should apply to your writing. Like explain the world, like explain the history. I'm like, I didn't want to explain why this happened. I just wanted to live out the questions I had. But my editor was like, we need to know why. Okay. So yeah, I did not plan everything out. And that was probably why it also took me 8 years.
Okay, question from Jason. Is Elamina the gutter child or someone close to her, trying to avoid spoiler language? Also, and the second part of his question, I'm going to hold off on that because that was actually going to be my last question for you, and we're about out of time. So
gutter child is a term, if I had read like 3 minutes longer, the part at the end of the first chapter, Elamina says, like, I don't think I belong here. I'm not a gutter child. And Josephine looks at her like, you don't know what you don't know. And so it actually is a term that applies to all of the students at Livingstone Academy. And she is the gutter child. That is the central focus. It's told through her perspective, but she comes across many gutter children, particularly at Livingstone Academy, but even after she eventually leaves there. And so it's really just a term for the young people who were born in the gutter.
Okay, and the second part of his question is, do you imagine space for a sequel? Which I have been very curious about.
So I do. Whether publishing does is a whole other question. I have actually, so top secret, won't be secret anymore. Part of the reason I took out the epilogue was because I wanted to more fully figure out what happens afterwards. And so as soon as, just in keeping like what happened with Stone Thrower, as soon as I submitted the manuscript for Gutter Child, I started writing the sequel. And it's actually done in the sense that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there are words in between that generally make sense. But it still obviously is a long way off in terms of being officially done. And I don't have like a publishing deal. It's not like officially going to emerge in the world. So I just tell everybody, buy lots of books. So if it sells really well, then they'll really want me to write a sequel. So that's all I can say about that.
There has to be a sequel. I need more of these people in my life. I miss them. I really do. And so yes, please buy the book and buy it from an independent book seller if you can.
And I'll do a little plug here. I think they're going to put it in the chat. I have, if you've bought the book or you're buying the book and you want it signed, I have little book plates that I will sign and mail to you. And so there's a little form, you can just fill it out and I'll send you a little card with the book plate, and then you just peel off the back and stick it in your book. So if you want one of those, hopefully the form gets sent out. And if not, find me on Twitter.
That's great. Listen, it was so great to talk to you. I feel like you will always be enmeshed for me with this incredible historic day. And I'm so thrilled that you've published this book and that you've written the next one, because I can't wait to read it. And Jael, congratulations. I hope I get to meet you in person one day. I feel like I know you.
I hope so too. And I hope I get to make it out to Vancouver soon. And I hope you enjoy the book, and more than enjoy it, I hope it makes you think.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody who tuned in tonight. And now I will hand it back to Leslie Hurtig.
Thank you, Marsha, and thank you, Jael. I concur. What a great event to have at the end of a really monumental and happy day. Thank you both so much for joining us. Jael, that was a nice little tidbit of news you shared with us there at the end. I think we'll all keep our fingers crossed about that. Gosh, we would love you to come back for the festival in the fall. We'll all keep our fingers crossed that we have you here in person. Thank you both so much. And thank you to our audience for joining us as well. We're delighted to have you. And we hope you'll come back on February 3rd, when we will be hosting an evening of thrilling bestsellers featuring Rumaan Alam, Ashley O'Drain, and Silvia Moreno Garcia. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Jael.
Bye all.
Night.
Good night.